Now to Indochina, and while fighting reaches a new intensity in Cambodia and Vietnam, Laos moves towards a peaceful future for its war-weary refugees. One aircraft in Laos that isn't on a military mission. This flight in January was the first of a series sponsored by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees to return thousands of displaced families from government camps to their own home villages. An emotional time for those waiting for relatives, friends and loved ones, some of whom have been parted by the civil war for up to 10 years. This party of 115 will be followed by nearly 11,000 others before the rainy season begins in June. The first group came from Nong Kar village near Vientiane, part of the government-held south, where they settled after fleeing from their homes on the plain of Jars around Luang Prabang. Heavy bombing by the American Air Force helped destroy their houses and ruin their farmland. But most of the refugees left to avoid being caught up in the fighting between government troops and the highly organized communist Pathet Lao insurgents. Before April last year, the movement of refugees would have been impossible, for until then, Laos had been divided by almost 20 years of civil war, with the majority of ordinary people treated like pawns, to be won or lost by the forces of two powerful half-brothers, Prince Suvarnabhuma, heading the royalists, and Prince Suvarnabhumi, commander of the Pathet Lao. In April, a coalition government was formed, sharing the leadership between the princes and their respective parties. It was the third coalition in 17 years, but 7 months of strenuous bargaining went before it to ensure that this one would not break down over petty disagreements. Everyone admitted it was time to lay down their guns, but no observer was willing to predict how long the country would remain at peace or how many wounds could be healed. The village of Nong Kar is really a government refugee camp, housing people who've experienced the ravages of war at first hand. To them, the signing of treaties meant little. They were more concerned with practicalities and getting on with the job of living as best they could. There are 280 families here, 2,160 people. And for many, this is the third or fourth attempt at settling into a new home. During the war, they were uprooted by the authorities or driven on by the advancing communist forces. Most are from the plain of Jars in the north, but they've lived here for between 4 and 10 years. A few families tried to return home before the peace, reluctantly turning back when they found the journey too dangerous. But most have tried to make life work in Nong Kar. It hasn't been easy carving out a living. When the refugees arrived at Nong Kar, they had almost nothing. Their belongings had been left behind or bartered for food on the way here. Since then, much has been done. The inhabitants of the village, and hundreds more like it on the Mekong Plain, have flung themselves into the job of starting all over again. Small holdings and homes have taken shape. Until now, a few families are even undecided whether to risk going home and losing all they've built up here. This man's fought floods and diseases with government help to grow his rice crop. But most would jump at the chance to return to their ancestral homes, even though some of their children were born at Nong Kar. A fisherman needs little in the way of equipment in Laos. The country is crisscrossed by rivers and waterways. So wherever a refugee fisherman settles, there's a living to be made. These fishermen are no exceptions. In fact, they were among the first to re-establish normal lives. It's been easier for fishermen refugees than for herdsmen. Some had to abandon as many as 70 water buffalo when they left home. That's quite a loss in a country where water buffalo are symbols of wealth and 9 out of 10 people earn their living on the land. Midday and time for a break. The fishermen roast a little of the morning's catch on the river bank. But most of the fish they take from the Mekong and its tributaries is fermented into a highly saleable sauce called paddock. Most refugees follow a traditional way of life in and around the government villages. But the move south has brought fresh opportunities for some. They've taken the road to town. Vientiane, the busy administrative capital 30 kilometers from Nong Kar village. Here's the chance to make money out of the prosperous townspeople. Some refugees have set up popular food stalls, specializing in Vietnamese-style delicacies, and the cash is rolling in. Women embroidering gay patterned cloth on the sidewalks are also newcomers from the north. They've never had such a lucrative market for their wares. Even so, many would still like to join those of their luckier friends who managed to hold on to their farms on the fertile plain of jars. These peasant women have journeyed into town with bundles of hardwood. They'll sell the wood to be crafted into ornaments. Those refugees who've seen Vientiane will return with colourful memories. They'll tell of the sights in the big city, the crowded streets, the stalls, and of course, the temples. As part of the peace agreement and the promise to give refugees the option of returning to their homes, patrols made up of soldiers from both sides search out refugees in Vientiane. Their job is to tell them how to get a flight north and to advise them about assistance schemes. These mixed mobile patrols are treated with a certain amount of suspicion. Anyone in a soldier's uniform can expect to face skepticism from refugees, and the sight of Pathet Lao and government troops, old enemies, together is still hard for some refugees to take. Even before the patrols began in Vientiane, as soon as the Provisional Government of National Unity was formed, some 6,000 refugees began to make their own way home, mostly by boat up the Nam Seine River towards Luang Prabang. Most villagers have learned of the government's relocation policy through visits from mixed teams like this one. A spokesman explained to the people of Nong Kha that they could choose freely where they wanted to settle. It was for individual villagers to decide whether they wanted to be flown home or to stay on. The official pointed out that those who did want repatriation should try to sell their belongings before they moved, because they'd have a baggage allowance of only 130 kilos on the plane, enough to take clothes and perhaps a few chickens. The speech prompted a question. One villager said, "We've been here 7 years, planted fruit trees, tamarind, papaya, bananas. If we stay, can we keep the land?" The official replied, "Of course, the land has been reserved for those who wish to stay." Once the decisions have been taken, things move quickly. The government and the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees are anxious to fly out as many villagers as they can before the rainy season. That way, more farmers will arrive at their new homes in time to plant a crop for next year. Once their minds are made up, the refugees are eager to be on their way. Phona Savan, the airport chosen to serve the first phase of the relocation scheme. The operation will involve transferring several 100,000 refugees at a cost of $12 million. The new government of national unity has said the scheme should have top priority, but the actual cost will be borne by the United Nations. And with a minimum of paperwork, the first flight prepares to leave.